And good morning, everybody. We are live. Congratulations. You made it through the week. Another amazing week of food safety, food quality, putting the most amazing products on the tables of everyone around the world, and doing it a lot of times without thanks because people just expect their food is going to be safe. But Alan and I, we know different. And we know of all the effort that you do behind the scenes. It often goes unheralded, but guess what? We wanted to say thank you. We appreciate all that you do. And if you're new to the chat, welcome. Pull up a chair. My name is Bryan Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group. And every Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, we live stream on LinkedIn and YouTube. And I get to bring an amazing person on here to talk with you about food safety. And this is what you'll notice, not a lecture. This is meant to convey information. And that's one of the things with this chat that we've done now, Alan, for like close to 5.5 years, is that piece of sharing information. Because if you're able to pick up just one new little thing that you can incorporate and take action on in your operations, it's a win for everybody. So people are starting to file in here. So Alan, you're in the Virginia area. How's your weather doing back there?
The weather is probably like the northern tier of the country. Right now we've got snow. We've had snow on the ground for about 2 weeks, which is very unusual for Virginia, but it was actually called snowcrete. In other words, we got about 6 inches of snow. Then we got not freezing rain, which would have been, further west. We got sleet for about 5 hours. So it put a crust on that snow that I think broke the backs of a lot of well-intentioned shovelers. And we are expecting a little bit of snow this weekend. So this has probably been one of the coldest winters in a long, long time here. But I'm enjoying it.
Well, that's interesting because here on this Friday the 13th out in Colorado, it's been one of the driest and warmest on record. And let's see, so currently in the morning, it's now 34 degrees. It's going to be up into the mid 50s today. Not a sign of snow in the forecast. So of course, out here, the ski resorts are going nuts. This is really, really bad for business for them. So they're not happy at all. And they're talking about, what's the water supply going to look like in the spring and all those other things that they need to worry about. So it'll be interesting for sure. So Des Moines, good old Michelle's there. Good morning to you. Tim is here. I got a little story with Tim here in a bit. And Sean from Port Dover, Ontario. Oof, yeah, that sounds cold up there for sure. So last week, Alan, we didn't have a chat, which happens every now and then. And I was in Tennessee. And I was able to, on my trip, to get a lot of stuff done. And I was able to meet up with Tim Steffensmeyer here in the chat. And it was Sunday, so it was the Super Bowl. And the restaurant we met at was shutting early for the Super Bowl, which was interesting. So I figured nobody would be there at that point in time. But we had a wonderful time. Tim's a great guy. It was nice. We've known each other for a while. We've never got to meet in person. We finally got to meet. And so Tim said, "Hey, let's take a picture together." And my wife took a picture. She took several of us standing outside the restaurant. And it was kind of an overcast day, but it must have been pretty bright out because we were both quitting pretty good. So I sent Tim a picture and said, "Hey Tim, how's this? Let's post this on LinkedIn." He's like, "Well, what? My eyes are shut." I'm like, and I looked at him like, "Oh crap, he's right. They are shut." And so I went through all the pictures and they were all shut. So I'm like, okay, I'm not quite sure what to do. So here's my solution. Here's the picture that Tim, and forgive me, Tim, but here's the picture I posted of Tim this morning on his site. So we've got his evil eyes there.
A food safety zombie. That's great.
Exactly. Well, the other picture I did that didn't get posted, maybe I'll dig this up and stick it on LinkedIn as well here today, is I put some sunglasses on him as well. So those turned out pretty well. So thanks, Tim, for being such a good sport. I appreciate it. So with that, number one, Alan, always glad to have you on the chat. You're just a wealth of information. And of course, you are the managing partner at the Center for Food Safety and Regulatory Services. And you and I have known each other a long, long time, and you've had a storied level of responsibilities in government and regulatory and working on the lobbying side of things, which is really kind of where we first met, is on that side with IDFA and those activities. And the work that you do out in the field is just, you're dialed in. So I'm always really excited to have you on the chat. And with that, why don't we kind of update everybody? What have you been working on? What's been your main focus here recently?
Well, surprisingly, and I didn't do much lobbying, but I did do a lot of consulting and still am. But yeah, if that got out, they would be checking why I wasn't registered. And fortunately, I didn't have to ever go up to the Hill, at least not officially. But the issues that really have been, getting my attention in the 40 some years that I've been around, I have never seen the problems in a particular sector that we're seeing today, and that is infant formula. Now, there's a lot of segues to that, so this is not going to be about just infant formula. I can assure you, and I know Bryan will make sure that this is broad-based. But when you look at, first of all, the ByHeart, okay, so that's one brand. And then you look at what's been happening just late 2025 and into 2026 in Europe. And you've got the major infant formula brands in Europe pulling back product. And what is the commonality? It's spores, and it's the toxins that spores generate. And so this is a very interesting topic because it is not just an infant formula problem. Yes, the population that infant formula is targeting is very susceptible to certain types of pathogenic spores and their toxins. But I can assure you that spores are a problem in meat and in bakery and in other types of foods where you think, well, they have a cooking step. There's some type of a step that seems to be a killing step. And we do understand the fact that a lot of adults that are not immunocompromised, that are relatively healthy, these spores are probably not going to be a health hazard. But the population is so mixed with the health, the health status of consumers that you never can say never, regardless of the food.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we're going to dive into this topic, but I almost forgot. I'm so anxious to get to it. Everybody, please join Alan and I for a drink of your favorite beverage. Oh, you got your kefir. I love that.
Yep.
Cheers. And as we look at this issue, which is why I was so happy that we were able to talk about this today, as a microbiologist, spores are kind of one of those weird things. Right? It's not easy. Okay, fine. We know how to grow salmonella in the lab, and we can do that very easily. But when it comes to spores, it's hard. And this is the lesson that I would try and communicate, especially to the operational teams within production facilities, is chemistry and microbiology are completely different. Chemistry, you're looking at homogeneity, you're looking at statistics, you're looking at your tests, and you're looking for precision and accuracy and what's your standard deviation, so you can really dial in that pH measurement and get those accurate numbers. Microbiology is not like that. It is all over the place. You're going to have different counts at the beginning of a run versus the end of the run. And it's going to depend how you pull your sample and your sample prep and all of these different variables. And you can even take the exact same sample, test it twice over a couple of days, and you're going to get different results. And that would confuse operations people because you would get, let's say you have a hit and you have a low level of coliforms in product, Alan. And the plant manager is, geez, we're out of spec on that coliform. Let's retest, right? That's always the thing. Let's retest. Okay, fine. Then you retest and you don't find anything. And then the plant manager goes, oh, wonderful. There's nothing there. No, that's not true. We did not repeat that information. Plus coliform, it's a different issue, dies off pretty quickly in the product. We test it because it's an indicator of a potential issue, and it's a surrogate for other types of bacteria that can be an issue in the Enterobacter category, salmonella, for example. And that's why it was started in the 40s. And we saw how this trap can have serious consequences. Peanut Corporation of America. We'll just keep retesting for salmonella until we find a negative result, and we'll put that on the COA. No, right? That doesn't work. And now, as we're referencing with our conversation around spores today, now it's even worse with spores. Number one, you have these different types of bacteria that produce these spores. So first off, what is a spore? Right? A lot of people may not know that, right? So this is the bacteria reacting to adverse growth conditions and saying, oh crap, this isn't looking too good for me or my family. Let's make some spores. and we'll put these spores out there, and then these spores will sleep until it's time again to grow. We're just going to hang around. And these things last forever. I think they've recovered spores from honey in Egyptian tombs. It is out there indefinitely. We all hear about the tardigrade, right? The little water bear guys that can pretty much survive in space. Spores are 100 times tougher than those guys. And they're not evenly distributed. And just because the spore is there doesn't mean it's going to germinate. It's all these different variables. And now put on top of that specialized growth conditions, Clostridium. Right? So botulism. The reason that's such a concern in canning is it has to grow under aerobic, low oxygen or no oxygen conditions. So now you have to try and replicate that in the lab. And so you have to have incubation without oxygen. And right. I'm getting a headache already, Alan, just trying to grow this stuff, right? Jeez.
Well, the two parts of the spore equation that I think bear a little bit of discussion. I'd like to start with the chemistry side, like you had brought up. And the European and the US ByHeart actually have different problems. The Europeans, the toxin was actually in the formula. Now, there are probably spores there as well, but it seemed like that the toxin was the causation of the infant illnesses. And it was the B. cirrus toxin. So let us talk about the chemistry. I'm going to harken back to my dairy roots when we had concerns about animal drug residues in milk. And 30 years ago, it was, we probably had it, but we didn't have any real effective way to do it other than doing some plating and taking about 48 hours was like the magic time. If we got it within 6-7 days, we were happy. And today, guess what? The technology is based on chemistry, and we can detect the chemistry of antibiotics in a dairy substrate within 15 minutes, and we know exactly what it is. Now let's segue into the toxins from the very spores, the Clostridium spores, the Bacillus spores, which are the main problems. And by the way, I found it interesting in preparing today that Clostridium perfringens is thought to be the most common foodborne illness causative agent in the spore family. But can we detect toxins rapidly? In other words, could we find in the next few years the technology or develop technology so that we could routinely check for toxins, for the basic toxins from Clostridium, including the botulism one, and from B. cirrus, which are the main causative toxins? And the answer is, if we can do it in a milk substrate and we can do it for 10 different drug residues, then I think it is not a very heavy lift to do this. And it's going to have to be done. And whether it is infant formula or whether it is the broader category of foods, there's a massive opportunity out there for somebody to develop this, because guess what? It really doesn't exist now.
Yeah. And Cortland, I think we're talking to you. Cortland owns a lab. And so, you gave me a flashback there, Alan, when you were talking about microbiological testing for antibiotics. I'd forgotten about that. I had to do that in the lab, where you would have, remember the little antibiotic discs, and you'd have to put them on the plate and look for the zone around. Oh yeah, I remember that now. Oh, hated that test.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so part of this as well is with that testing too, it becomes more and more accurate as well. So these tests, right, you're finding micrograms per liter on these type of tests, and you're getting those results very quickly. It's very, very easy to detect these things. But really, and I think around our conversation today, kind of the meta topic, as we'll kind of bring this in as we're talking about this, I want everybody to kind of keep this in mind, is what we're finding out with these issues with Lactalis and Danone and ByHeart is the importance of your supply chain and understanding your suppliers. There's a reason why FDA put suppliers in as a preventive control. Time and time again, we see failures in the supply chain that are causing these companies issues. And just sitting back and saying, oh, well, I've done my hazard analysis and I've got a COA from the supplier, I'm good, doesn't really cut it. And as I go out and do risk assessment and then talk with different companies, I see this time and time again. Evaluating your suppliers is labor intensive. It takes a lot of work, right? In cases where you're really concerned about a supplier, you have to send boots on the ground and go out and evaluate these. And if that supplier's overseas, now it's even worse. How do you even evaluate those things becomes even more difficult. But we're seeing the end results of these issues. And if you don't manage your suppliers, your suppliers, unfortunately, are going to manage you because as we kind of looked at here, and I pulled up a couple of these pages here, Alan, to kind of reference as we're looking at these as well, so here's kind of the headlines from the latest from ByHeart. And let's make this a little bigger here. So what we're finding, and as well, one of the things, Alan, that's very common in these, and this goes back to a show that we had recently, is we have to play detective, don't we? So the ByHeart issues start. We start finding out there's issues in the field. It's like, oh my goodness, what's going on with this infant formula? Then we start seeing bits of information saying that, well, FDA issued, these reports 2 years ago on ByHeart with findings in the plants. And then we find out that Target isn't removing the recalled product from the store shelves. And now, let's see, how long has this recall been going on now? What, a couple months or something? It's been a while now, right?
At least 6 months, if not longer. Yep.
Yeah. And so now we're finding out, well, lo and behold, this is the latest from our friends at Food Safety News. And shout out to Food Safety News. Bill Marler paid for this out of his pocket. Yep. He has now moved this to a subscription model. Support this. This is where I get all my information for food safety. This is worth the $60 a year or whatever it is for this. I have no affiliation with this. It's just support this, right? This is really, really important for your food safety programs. So with that, this headline, as we were preparing for this, Alan, is, so organic powdered milk now appears to be the problem. So where did your mind go to this with this botulism issue? What was the first things that kind of came to mind for you?
Well, the main ingredient in infant formula is powdered milk. So did we know it came from powdered milk? No, but is there a high likelihood? Yes. And FDA requires under supplier management for the preventive controls that you identify the hazards that are coming with your supplied ingredient, and you determine, are you going to control that hazard, or is your supplier going to control a hazard? Now, you can say, well, wait a minute, I get 50 different things that I put into a product. Are you telling me, Bryan and Alan, I'm supposed to be doing all these things for all 50? No, but guess what? 95% of the infant formula is made up of milk powder. So wouldn't it have been a good idea at least to take the 95th, the one that's the biggest, and put more effort into it? And I'm willing to bet, and I know ByHeart is a very good company, so please don't think this is saying anything bad about ByHeart, but I will guarantee you that most food manufacturers, they dismiss spores or do not take spores seriously. And as a result, it's not a hazard you identify either in your own food safety plan, or you don't identify it for your supplier and ask them what they're doing about it. And if we do not get on board with these pathogenic spores, we're going to have more and more outbreaks, and it won't just be limited to infant formula.
No, that's a very good point. And part of this is the way we view our risk assessments. Yeah. We're very accustomed to doing our food safety plans, our hazard analysis, our hazard programs. Okay, great. We got 3 categories: chemical, physical, biological. Okay, got it. Let's look up Appendix 1 for FDA and see what they say. Oh, okay, here's some of the microbiological hazards. Great. All right, I'll put this in my charts. All right, let's see, severity, likelihood. I'm going to put medium. Medium sounds about right. And I get a COA. Done. Wrong. There are so many different variables here that people are missing in this. Number one, right, and underline this, write this in your notes if you're taking notes. Risk is contextual, right? The chemical, physical, and biological hazards that we've identified this are for general analysis. You need to look at this specifically for your company. So in this example, if you're producing infant formula, is your consumer base more risky than the general population? Oh, hell yeah, it is, right? tiny little babies whose digestive systems is just starting to develop, who are extremely sensitive. Why don't we feed babies honey? And there's a risk there with the potential for these spores in the honey. Doesn't hurt us, but babies don't have any defense against those things. One of the most sensitive groups and the most important group that we need to be thinking about from a food safety standpoint. So if you're in an infant formula company, Alan, and your procurement group is just going out and buying non-fat dry milk willy-nilly, okay, well, we just need a source of organic non-fat dry milk for our product. You're asking for trouble, aren't you?
You really are. And again, it gets back to who is going to take care of the hazard, and have we properly hazard? We don't put in the biological hazards spores. We just presume that, for the average adult, it's not a problem. And yet it is for so many different reasons. And I think that in the next couple of years, we're going to see a migration in our hazard analysis where spores are going to be put in there, but they create an impossible problem for most of us. We do not have a way of negating spores, either the toxin. We have no magic, carbon filter that will pull a toxin out. They're heat stable. So if you heat the product up, that isn't a problem. That isn't going to solve the problem. But this is an interesting side, because I do work for other infant formula companies who will remain nameless. And one of the things that just struck me in the last couple of weeks is that they pasteurize, they rehydrate their product, pasteurize it, and before they dry it, they go through a UHT unit. And it was like, why are you putting all this heat? Because your heat degrades some of the nutritional value, right? But guess what the UHT unit does? It kills spores. Well, it's killing it. It inactivates the spores. And it finally was the aha moment. Well, can we do that for all of the different foods that we manufacture? Probably not. But I think more and more we're going to have to come up with an answer to this pathogenic spore issue in all foods, because I don't think FDA is just going to walk away from this. I can tell you that just in the last week, Codex, which is an international food standard organization out of the United Nations, has said they are going to develop a food safety model and standard for infant formula that will specifically target spores and their toxins.
Yep. Yeah. So great comments here, guys. So Jay has a good comment here on your flawed informed hazard analysis. And so Cortland's talking about here in his lab how they test for spores and regulated products. Huge issue, right? So Cortland's agreeing with us here as well.
Wow.
Now, part of this is, and we know this from our dairy background, is go and ask your process authority. So that's the experts in making sure that your process itself produces a safe product. And when you get into low acid canned foods and things like this, spores, extremely important. The time and temperature to kill and the delta associated with, and we don't want to get too technical here, but the time and temperature with dairy products, we'll call it 165-ish or so, 15 seconds. Depends on the whole process, right? The numbers don't really matter. Now, go by that same process authority and say, okay, now I want to increase my time and temperature in the process to get rid of all my spores. Good luck. Ain't going to happen. You're still going to have spores survive in that process, and you're going to probably burn your product at that point in time. There used to be. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's crazy.
I couldn't let that moment go by, and then I'm going to apologize for interrupting. But this thing about spores and your temperature time relationship, I think there was something that's worth adding here, is that the characteristics of spores, we have forgotten more. They did massive research in spores back in the late 50s, early 60s, believe it or not. Well, who cares, right? Except we forgot about all that information. And when 9/11 happened and the Department of Homeland Security was created, they actually asked the dairy industry to start raising the temperature of their pasteurization time and temperature to inactivate some of the common chemical agents. Let's just leave it at that, okay? Yeah. So guess what? The entire dairy industry increased, not from 165, which Bryan is absolutely right. We went up to about 177. And you know what happened within 2 weeks? Our shelf life collapsed. And the reason was we made the spores think that they were going to die. So what did? They vegetated, and these were spoilage and probably pathogenic. And then they started, so then we put these not the spores, but the vegetative form in our dairy products, and the shelf life just collapsed. And after about 3 months, we realized this good intention, nobody had studied the science, nobody knew the science anymore, except a few people. And so, you can increase temperatures and actually create problems. So you either go up to the UHT levels and you kill them, or you don't activate them. Sorry, Bryan.
No, and yeah. So I mean, so obviously, Al and I have dealt with these issues for many years, and there used to be a huge issue in the dairy industry around chocolate products. Why? Because cocoa, and Alan knows where I'm going with this. So one of the commonalities associated with spores is contact with soil, right? So if you have a product that's relatively close to you're going to have more issues. So with the manufacturing and the processing of cocoa, one of the steps in Africa is to take all the pods and you lay them out on the ground and let them dry, right? And you move them around, everything. So there used to be very serious issues with spores for cocoa, even in the finished processed cocoa powders. Those spores would make it through, right? Spores are designed to be tough little dudes that can pretty much survive anything. That's how they evolved.
Yep.
And one of the steps you would do when you had a chocolate milk product is you would have a hydration step for your cocoa powder. So you would make this mushy slurry of cocoa powder and put it at a nice warm temperature and let it sit for a little while. So to Alan's point, those spores would go, oh, cool, it's time to grow. And they would vegetate, that term, and they would become cells and they would start growing. And then you would run the process through, because now it's much easier to kill a bacteria versus a spore. Now, the good news is that the cocoa industry much better than they used to be. That giant threat with spores in cocoa has largely been eliminated if you have good suppliers. But odds of it coming back, pretty good, right? So spores are unique in that we are fighting against something that is designed to survive. It's like a seed. They want to hang around and grow at some point in the future, and they're willing to wait as long as it takes. And so we have to fight against that. So spores are an interesting thing for sure. And to your point, there's all these different categories. And with that, back to our supplier conversation, is in a lot of ways, Alan, if you're working in a product, and I have clients in the plant-based space, again, close to the ground, a lot of different powders and things from the plant-based industry are at a higher risk for spores, same reason. And what we learned through this process is that you need to be intimately involved with your suppliers. You need to understand their process. It's not merely enough to say, okay, well, are you GFSI? Can I have your certificate? I need your COAs. I need your lot testing, et cetera, because of the sporadic nature of spores. And just like that cocoa, if you are producing processes and steps within your manufacturing for these powders, you can be encouraging the growth of bacteria that produce spores and increasing those spore levels. And if that manufacturer doesn't control their process very carefully, they can be encouraging the growth of these particular bacteria that are prevalent for spore growth. And it's a tricky balance. And what I've found is when you talk with a lot of these suppliers, they don't even know. They're not even looking at this.
And one of the things about pathogenic spores, and this is not entirely true, but it's a good rule of thumb, is that they like anaerobic environments. So have we gone through our processing steps to see where we have created, either intentionally or unintentionally, anaerobic environments? And also, are those anaerobic environments also occurring at temperatures? Bryan, as you said, temperatures. Now, if they're occurring at refrigerated temperatures, the spores are not going to take advantage of this growth opportunity, more than likely. But for instance, powdered products, once they're powdered, we don't refrigerate them. And therefore, our powdered products in an anaerobic environment, well, guess what? We got smart a few years ago and we started pulling the oxygen out of the packaging containers and replacing it with nitrogen, maybe with other inert gases. And the idea was that we get longer shelf life. What have we just done? We've removed one of the impediments for many of these pathogenic spores. We've removed the oxygen. They don't really like oxygen in most cases. So as part of our hazard analysis, do we look at those? And I'll have to admit, I haven't, but I certainly plan to.
And Duncan reminded me about the dad joke. I didn't tell the dad joke. So I'm going to save the dad joke for the end. Right? Everybody's got to wait till the end for the dad joke. Thanks, Duncan. Spores. And what's interesting with spores too is we were, Bacillus cereus. We haven't really talked about that one a whole lot. So Bacillus cereus listed in the bad bug book. So FDA created, a long time ago, the bad bug book, which was the different types of concerns for bacteria and parasites, et cetera, that FDA was worried about in food. And this kind of became the basis originally for building out your food safety plan. And Bacillus cereus was in there, and it was kind of just listed at the end as a footnote. But what's interesting about all these mechanisms that we're talking about, and you've referenced this a couple of times, Alan, so I wanted to bring this up explicitly now as well, is the toxins. So why is Bacillus cereus such a problem? And for a long time, it was referred to as this is the potato salad poisoning. It's like, well, what? Why? Because church picnic. Someone makes potato salad and you're out in, nice, beautiful 80 degrees behind the church. Everybody's got their picnic tables out and everybody brings different desserts and foods. And one of them is potato salad. Potatoes grows in the ground. Potatoes, lots of spores. And you have Bacillus cereus spores. And then you put them in this beautiful growth environment and they start growing. But to your point, Alan, it's not necessarily the bacteria that's the problem. It's the toxin that the Bacillus cereus is producing. And that's then what makes people sick. That becomes an intoxicant. It's not the actual bacteria. It's the toxin that the bacteria produces. And that's why if you have food poisoning from something like that you get sick very, very quickly. You don't have to wait for the bacteria to grow. That toxin's right in there, gets absorbed, and you're barfing pretty quick. And you need extremely small amounts of this toxin to make you sick, which compounds your testing.
Yeah.
And you know where I'm going next. And some of the toxins produced are heat stable. They're emetic. They run right through that process and they have no problem making it to a finished product.
So you're trying to tell me that it's not the eggs and it's not the salad dressing and potato salad? Japers.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
The internet knows that's really the cause, Brian, but you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. One of the other things I'd like to throw out and get your feedback on, and anybody else that's listening, is that, okay, so we've talked about spores in ingredients, or we could have spores that we create during processing. The spores don't just appear magically. And so one of the things that I've always been curious about is many of the facilities that I've inspected or I work with, they'll do what are called yeast and mold plate counts, right? They do this fairly frequently over a period of, say, 2 months. They look for a baseline that they think is normal for their operations, and then they start monitoring maybe once every 2 weeks and see are they above the baseline or below. And it has a lot to do with ventilation. It has to do with filtration. It has to do with the age of the facility, cracks, crevices, all of those little details that we tend not to want to think about because they're just a pain. But have we ever thought about putting plates out and doing spore counts and establishing a spore count baseline for a manufacturing facility? I'm not versed in laboratory methods, so I really don't know how easy it is to, I know it'd be easy to put a plate out and probably capture the spores. How to enumerate them. I'm not talking about necessarily growing them though, just enumerating them, but it may be good to, can you type them too? Is there an easy way to separate spoilage spores and spores that are not pathogenic from those that are? And find out how full is our environment of these pathogenic spores that are just floating around waiting for an opportunity.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's not easy, that's for sure. Most plant labs not set out for this. And so, for example, when we would test for spores in powders in the lab, you would do a shock test. And so you prepare a solution, you let it grow for a little bit after you heat treat it. So you would have a test tube, you put some of it in there, make up a solution, heat it up. So what you're doing is you're activating those spores and saying, okay, go, time to grow. And then you shock it, and then you would plate that. So it can be done. Now, if you're looking for anaerobic spores, now you got another hurdle to get over. It's like, okay, how do I create that anaerobic environment? Do I have any of the special chambers that you need to grow those in, et cetera? So most plants, I would think, would have to end up sending that out. And so, Dr. Marshall, who's on the chat here quite a bit with Eurofins, a fantastic micro expert. If a company was looking at setting something like that up to figure this out, that would be highly beneficial to speak with him. And he's always happy to speak with people. But that becomes very important to your point, Alan, as part of looking at this from your supplier and your environment and your hazards. If you're producing an infant formula product or a plant-based product, anything that's susceptible to spores, or you have very high-risk consumer base, this is something you should be looking at.
I agree. And I think that as we expand into other sectors, one of the sectors I'd like to just discuss for briefly is the meat sector. Now, wait a minute, infant formula meat, what's the relationship at all? And I'm going to tell you that it is my belief, and I don't have a lot of facts other than some personal experiences, that I think a lot of the meat that is sold in the United States is contaminated with various Clostridium spores, maybe not botulinum, but perfringes, difficult, absolutely. And I have heard through the medical profession that if you go into the hospital, the most likely cause of death, if it's not from the condition that took you into the hospital, is C. difficile. So either way. And so where does that come from? Well, let's not get into the medical side of things. Let's get into the meat side of things. If you look at the product, it is exposed almost throughout the entire time that it is manufactured until packaging. And then it's refrigerated. That's great. And then we may lose refrigeration, but maybe not for long periods of time. As soon as we lose refrigeration, those spores that are in the meat or in the muscle or, contaminated from maybe not a very good slaughtering process, they start to germinate. And maybe then they're refrigerated. Well, guess what happens? We just increased the number because they vegetated, and then we cause them to go back into spores again. Now we have higher numbers. And if that's repeated, if our cold chain is not the best, and in the US, we think we've got the best cold chain, and we understand we have breakdowns. We have problems. We have drivers that are parking their rigs in neighborhoods that don't like the noise of the refrigeration units. And guess what? As they go home to visit, mom and children, they shut the thing down for 3 or 4 hours, and then they turn it back up again. So the meat industry, I don't think pays a lot of attention nor cares about spores because it's not our issue. The people that eat it are not infants, obviously not, and a lot of them are probably not going to be immunocompromised, although a few could. But we also have the same issue. And I think more and more, if the industry doesn't pay attention and do a little bit of advanced checking on their own, we're going to have more problems in the industry, the meat industry, with spores, and particularly pathogenic spores.
Yep, definitely. So Jay has a question for you here. If we can get this one up here. So he was wondering if you had any comments around the UK and EU approaches to spore loads in dairy products. Any major differences? Any thoughts around that? I don't know. That's
I would propose that they are not looking. They have not been. Let me put it this way: they have not been looking at spores. Now, are they? Their level of knowledge and expertise is comparable to the U.S. So it's not that. It's just similar to the U.S. We didn't really, for lots of reasons, have a history of pathogenic spore problems, except in canned foods, foods. And so other than that, we didn't pay much attention. Then, yes, we knew about the potential for infants and the Clostridium botulinum. And I would suggest that with the European outbreak now, B. cirrus, we knew about it, but we just felt that we were not creating conditions that would allow the spores to either germinate and produce the toxin or be in high enough numbers to cause problems in the infants that consume them. And both of these have been disproven, and disproven in a big way. And I want to, really set a mark in the by Heart, in my opinion, was a good company doing the just as much due diligence and trying to make their product safe as any other infant formula company. And I don't know where they're going. I hope this isn't true, but I just read a story in the last 2 days that said that they're likely to be financially insolvent. And that means bankruptcy. And that means they're probably not going to be in the infant formula industry much longer. And they went from being an up and coming, really providing another alternative to the traditional few infant formula companies in the US, which is what we were all looking for, is a couple of there's more redundancy in the infant formula sector. We've just, we're moving backwards. It's almost like we're moving back into the Stone Age in the infant formula sector in some ways.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it reminds me of the saying that I have on here, Alan, which is in food safety, it's not the risks that you know about that are the threat. It's the risks you haven't considered that are the threat. Excellent. And that's definitely our theme here for today. Now, take a look at this. And one of these aspects that underlies everything that we're talking about here, Alan, is water activity. So bacteria need available water to grow, which is why, powders, you're not going to get growth. There's no water in there for those guys to activate. So those spores are just kind of hanging around. By Heart, a dry powder product. Now also think about other products out in the marketplace. So we've been talking about, managing on the supplier side for these things, managing in the plant side. Now think about the consumer side as well. We see lots of different products out there. I've got some in my pantry right now. So let's say, for example, here is a mixture of healthy greens because nobody's got time to eat all their vegetables. And so we took all those things, all these wonderful vegetables from the earth. Oh, hello, Spores. And we ground them all up, liquid process. We dried them so that you can now create a nice, healthy drink anytime you want. Okay, now let's say, for example, I make up this nice green healthy drink in the morning before I go to work. And I put it in one of those big giant jugs that the millennials like to have. And I shake it all up and I make this big green jug of stuff and I take it to work with me and I sip on that all day. What's going on, right? Those spores that are in there have the available water, they have nutrients, they have temperature, they're off to the races. And the consumer element of this a lot of times too, Alan, is something that we forget. How are the people actually producing the product and using it?
Oh, that is a great example. And I've got a real life thing that happened, I think about 10, 12 years ago. Was an elderly lady in Florida always loved her carrot juice. And so she would go to the store, go to the refrigerated section and get the carrot juice that she liked. She didn't know that it was UHT processed, which meant it killed all the spores because carrots are a ground vegetable. So she went one day and she noticed that her brand was out of stock, but sitting right next to it was a brand that looked, just about the same. It seemed to be the same. It was a different brand. And what she would do is she would take this product home. She'd leave it on the shelf because she liked to drink it warm, not refrigerated. And so she left this on the shelf. And then she surprisingly got called out to dinner. So that stayed on the shelf until the next morning. She did her normal morning routine. She drank the carrot juice. And that evening, when she wasn't responding to calls, they found her and she had passed away. And it was from Clostridium botulinum toxin. And guess what had happened for the 24 hours that carrot juice? And she didn't know that carrot juice that was the second brand that she picked was not UHT processed. It was pasteurized. And guess what pasteurized product does? It kind of angers the spores. And when you take them out of refrigeration, they grow and they grow rapidly. And they had the perfect environment to do it. So this is real life. This isn't theory. I would suggest that other things that we don't even think about. Let's take chips. Everybody has got chips, whether they're corn chips or potato chips, and they get a lot of heat processing right before they're made. Well, so does rice. Rice is commonly boiled. I don't think any of us eat it without boiling it. And yet it is known that B. cirrus can be found in rice that has been boiled maybe too low a temperature, don't know the reason why, and then stored in large volumes without being properly refrigerated or being refrigerated in large mass where the inner part of the rice ball, so to speak, is at warmer temperatures than the refrigerated outer part. And we get B series toxin. So, okay, so if that can happen to rice that has boiled, let's take a look at these chips. What do we do with these chips? Well, we eat them and they're dry. And that's probably okay. We're consuming the spores in probably low numbers. But what happens when we put them into a casserole or we do other things with them, which is common today. I go to buffets at my various clubs and they'll have casseroles that are coming from various people's kitchens. Do you know the cold chain steps that went through? How long it was sitting on somebody's shelf? And all of a sudden, the few spores that are in these chips that are ground to be condiments on top, or they're built in, well, they're baked. What's the problem, Alan? Well, so is the rice boiled. How did the B. cirrus survive that? There's more that we need to understand about these processes. We just see, well, this happened, it was boiled, and then this happened, we cooled it, and then the toxin showed up. What's happening in between? And so when you think about the potential for spores to be a bigger problem in the food industry, we have just scratched the surface. There's so much that we're not thinking through that is going to come to light in the near future. And I'm just hoping most of you, I hope we properly put a little bit of fear in you, start rethinking the way that you've approached spores and risk in your foods.
Right. Well, yeah, so you got me thinking on that too. So this exactly parallels your earlier story with that UHT secondary processing. So the manufacturer of the carrot juice says, oh, okay, well, we need to treat this carrot juice, time and temperature, pasteurize it, and we'll kill everything off. Fantastic. You just did a great job killing off all the vegetative cells that are in that carrot juice. Wonderful. The spores go, whatever, I don't care. Do your worst. Now what have you done? You've created an open field for when those spores vegetate. They have no competition. Oh, lost Alan there. So part of what you have done now is you have given those spores a competitive advantage over everything else because everything else is dead. So now they're all dead and they're going to grow even faster than before. So Jay's making some fantastic comments here. So is Sean, right? Creating niches associated with that. Hopefully Alan will be back on here in a second. So Jay said, so CBOT, so Clostridium botulinum germinated. Oh, here comes Alan. There we go. So my point that I was just making was you kill off everything other than the spores. And so you now give the spore producing bacteria a huge competitive advantage because they have nothing to compete against. And we're seeing here with carrot juice and growth in that, and it wasn't even actually anaerobic. Some of these things can also operate under micro anaerobic environments as well. So we got to remember with this whole thing is these bacteria have been around for billions of years and they're really, really good at surviving. They know a lot more about it than we do. And they've created these mechanisms for doing this. The rice, again, perfect example, right? So yeah, okay, you boil it, you kill off all the bacteria exactly like the carrot juice. And it took with these different juices. So if you're older and you've been in the food industry for a while, Odwalla immediately comes to mind.
Oh, yeah.
The other big issue that happened after Jack in the Box, where they were producing juices that weren't even heat treated. Oh, our raw juices that are super healthy. And that was a gigantic issue. Wow. Yeah. Jay's got some good information there as well in the comments, guys. So, kind of an overall theme around on this is these overlooked food safety threats that are going to become more and more prominent. There was a huge project, and you can look this information up online. There's a consortium. There's a private sector government university coalition in Europe called NIZO, N-I-Z-O, the NIZO Consortium. And I was involved with this with other large food companies and doing tons of research on spores and other things in these new plant-based products. And we've found a ton of information that's out there on this now. So people are starting to look at this and realizing this is a much more serious threat than we thought. I
agree. And, I like your point about microclimates, microenvironments. as we are doing a reevaluation, and I hope we've piqued the interest of some people and realized, the smartest people are the people that know what they don't know, and we don't know a lot about spores, or we just ignore it, one of the two. But these microclimates. So as we're looking at our processes, do we create microclimates? For instance, the comment that was made about, well, I'm surprised that it was in this pasteurized carrot juice because, there's oxygen, there's probably free oxygen in the juice itself. Certainly the headspace probably had oxygen. That I don't know. The thing I don't know is did they use an inert gas for the headspace or not? I suspect not. I suspect it was probably an oxygenated headspace. That isn't where the spores are growing. They're growing in the juice. And if the juice, and we think that there's some free oxygen, and there is, but there may not be enough free oxygen to inhibit the vegetation of spores. And so as you look at your processes, have our micro environments existing in your processes, and what do they need? A reduction or no oxygen. They need the proper temperature, and they need a food source at the right water activity. And frankly, the water activity can be quite wide. If you are creating those environments, or do you know, if you don't check every step and also the time, because time is very important, and go back and reanalyze everything you've done with the spore concept, pathogenic spore concept in mind, and you may have to recommend modifying your process. And of course, production loves that, and management loves it even more. But would you rather do that, even if they don't listen to you? I always say that our job in food safety and quality is to inform production management and give them our best advice. What they do, we can't control. But if we don't do it, then we're the ones that are responsible, not them.
Right. So really, I mean, we've given everybody a ton to chew on here today. So my recommendation is you need to be thinking about spores and the potential threat to your products in three main buckets. The first is your suppliers, and going out and talking with your key suppliers. So to your point, there's two main categories for your supplier for looking at risk. Of course, there's threats. There's also usage. So if you have a raw material that's going into your finished product, which is a significant portion of it, even if it's a low risk, you still need to understand it. Because if you have a problem, it's going to be a big problem. You also need to look at unique or proprietary ingredients that you can't source from anywhere else and you're stuck. You need to then understand their processes. And you're going to gain that knowledge by understanding your processes. So if, for example, to your point, Alan, let's say that you're making a dried powdered product. And one of the things the operations group has done to set up efficiency, because drying is extremely expensive and it uses a lot of energy, is you want to run that equipment as long as possible and just keep that sucker going. So you need a lot of raw materials processed ahead of time to keep that equipment going, because every process has bottlenecks. So if you are producing a lot of liquid product in giant tanks that are sitting at a growth temperature for those bacteria that produce spores, that could be an issue. You need to understand that. And you also need to understand that when you look at the finished product and you're just looking at micro, those bacteria may be gone, but the toxin may still be there. So if you produce an environment that allows for the production of those threats in the product, you need to be looking at that on the finished side. The other piece of this then is the usage of how these things are being used and what threats are the consumers going to be introducing with these products. There's a reason why in the infant formula world, if you're preparing formula for your child, you only make it a little bit at a time, right? You make up that bottle, and then bam, you're giving it to that kid right away. What if a mom doesn't know that and they're saying, this is very inefficient. I'm going to produce a nice hydrated batch of infant formula for my child for the entire day. Big problem. So educating the consumer becomes just as important, because guess what? That's going to become your problem. FDA doesn't care. You need to manage that.
Excellent points. And by the way, I do know most moms make up multiple bottles so that throughout the day, all they have to do is go to the refrigerator, warm the bottle up, and then, or fill it up either way, and then away we go. And that's probably okay, because one of the key factors is temperature, and spores will stay spores if you are at certain temperatures. But you're right. If you are loading your backpack with 5 bottles because you and baby are going out for a long day of errands and lunch and everything like that, and those bottles stay unrefrigerated for too long, you become the responsible party, not the manufacturer, for jeopardizing the safety of your child. And that's not what parents want to do. But I don't think that they really think about this or understand it totally. And there should be more consumer education on this, as you said.
Yeah. It's a chain. Weird little factoid is that the temperature of the product for what you store on your doors in your fridge can vary by as much as 10 degrees versus the back of your fridge. So if you're storing that influence formula on that door, it's going to have a lot higher opportunity for growth, and people don't think about that, which is kind of weird. So we're at the 5-minute mark here, Alan. Time flew on this. It's some fantastic. I love micro conversations. What's at a high level, 30,000 foot? What would you like to leave people with here today?
I think it's a relatively simple encouragement, and that is to go back and look at your entire hazard analysis and all the main steps and what you're getting from your supplier, and establish a risk based on pathogenic spores and what you've learned about them, what you knew certainly before coming on the call today, and also what Bryan and I have talked about. You've done it for a lot of other things. Let's just do it for spores. Go back and look at the spores and see whether you have opportunities either supplied by your supplier, opportunities is a poor word maybe, or that you've created those opportunities for spores to accumulate or to grow or to produce toxin. That's what I would encourage people to do as a takeaway.
Yep, absolutely. And so Cortland makes a very good point here as well. Ready to eat, right? Ready to eat. Everything that we're producing now is for immediate consumption. That increases risk as well. Good point, Cortland. Thank you. So one of the things I wanted to bring up here on the chat as well before we close out is, as I had mentioned a couple of weeks ago, Alan, I'm retiring, and so it's a weird thing. It's a mindset. Right? I'm getting used to this. You in our minds, and this is definitely, I think, a guy thing. In our minds, we're still 25 years old. We still look the same. We still act the same. But we look in the mirror and we see this old dude, and we're like, who is that? And our wives are very quick to point out that no, you're not 25 anymore, right? So that realization has hit me. So part of that is life is meant to be enjoyed, and so part of this then is reaching that stage where you get to do that. And so I'm beginning that process of exploring that. And one of the things that I've done on this as well then is with these chats is, so I've saved them all. I've saved all the transcripts, all of the MP3 files, all of the summaries of the notes and everything that goes into these chats. I think this is chat number, where are we at? This is chat number, I believe 262.
Wow.
So we have about 7 chats left. My last chat is going to be the first Friday in April. And as kind of a thank you to everybody, with the food safety chat, I put together and I'm giving everybody access to all of this for $10. And
wow.
And with that, I'll pull it up here so you can see it. Here's what the database looks like. So you can go to, I'll put the link in here. And within here, I've divided this, Alan, into different topic categories. So biosecurity. So think back to the conversations I had with Rod Wheeler around that. Food safety, operations, quality, standards, all of these different topics. Normally, if you get access to all these, it was like $300. So I've dropped that down to $10. And all of that is in there. That's it. There's no additional cost. That's it. It's kind of my way of saying thank you to everybody for attending the chat and making it what it is. And the overall theme with this, that's why I've done this whole chat, is to share that information out there, because food safety is not a point of competition. And I wanted to give forums to people like you who are true experts in the field to have a platform to share that knowledge and expertise. Because unfortunately, in what we do, our knowledge tends to be insulated into what we do. So if I work for a food company, that food company benefits from it, but the industry needs to benefit from that. So that's been the overall theme with that. So
Bryan,
hopefully,
I'd just like to say, I want to thank you. You're creating a huge vacuum by retiring. You're going to be missed, and I would hope people take advantage of this. The reruns are always better than the original, and there is massive. If you need to do training, Bryan has just provided a massive amount of training that could work very effectively. So thank you.
Thank you. Oh, that's a good point too. So I also created an Excel file that's in there for each of those. You can sort them by topic or guest. So if you want to go back and look at all of the different times Alan has been on the chat and look at the different topics, then you can go to that section and then pull those up directly, which works really well. And what's nice too is other people are stepping up as well too. So Michelle is doing a wonderful job with hers. Her podcast out there is growing and doing a fantastic job. So good job on that, Michelle. Keep it up. So there's lots of people who are going. I know people are going to step up and do a fantastic job, which is what we all want. So one more thing that I forgot, and thank you again, Duncan, for this. Are you ready, everyone, for the dad joke? Here we go. The end of show dad joke. So, Alan, little known fact, but mermaids, what do they actually wash their fins with?
Seawater?
Close. They use Tide. Tide.
My.
I tried to find a Friday the 13th dad joke, and they were terrible. They were all terrible. So if that's the best one I found, you know how bad the other ones were.
That's pretty good.
So with that, everybody, thank you for all you've done this week, everything that you've done for food safety. Get out there, enjoy the weekend, have a great time. Hopefully the weather improves in Virginia, and we will see you back here next week at the same time, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern for the next food safety chat, where I'll bring another amazing guest like Alan on the show. So in the meantime, have a great time, and we'll see you then. Thanks.